Hi! Of course, the word emergency tends to get my attention. What's going on? So everyone's okay? No, I hear you. But you're trying to figure out if your employee was recording you yesterday and stalking their social media to see if they posted? Well, yes, and we can talk about that generally, but whether it's illegal depends on a lot of things. Like in the US, it depends on where you're located. Well, but workplace conversations often aren't considered private. And so it could depend on where you're located and whether you're like a one-party consent or all-party consent. So what that means is if it's a one-party consent, and it depends, like if it's a remote conversation what states you're both in, but in that, then one party to the conversation, as long as they want to record it, they can. Right, but you're the other party, and it almost doesn't, well, it literally doesn't matter under the law. If the person recording it is talking to you and wants to, they can. No, it's true, but there's other states that are all party consent. So if there's two or more people, all of you all have to know and agree to have it be recorded. Yes, but the legality, like, I'll let our legal team speak to, like, court and how that depends on the legal aspect. But I talk to sometimes, like, the court of public opinion. Meaning, if you're concerned that your employee was recording you, that says a few things. Like, what kind of conversation was it? Like a performance conversation. Okay. Well, you'd see that often now. Like, maybe not often, but you see that, like, on social media. People recording conversations. Like, sometimes it's a layoff conversation. People record it. And honestly, again, putting all of the, like, legal stuff aside, there's some that honestly, I think it's helpful in a way that those see the light of day. Because sometimes it's so bad. Like it's someone's off camera and they're just reading a script and you're like, this is what happens. And so it's important for organizations to see that as an example of like, gosh, don't do this. So if you're going to be doing it, please don't do it that way. And so other times, yeah, like a performance conversation. I mean, one thing that I like to frame the other way is to always assume that you're always being recorded. I don't think a lot of people constantly have recording devices. No, but generally that can help you not think about like, are they or aren't they, or how am I going to come off? No, but it doesn't mean always being on, because often the reason that people might record things, again, sometimes it's like a bad layoff conversation or otherwise, but that tends to show a relationship of like a lot of mistrust. And so yeah, they may be doing it. There's a lot that likely led up to that conversation. And so being mindful. Other times people might be recording it or have like even AI things, although those tend to pop up on screen and you can see it. But people do those sometimes because they want to hear what's part of the conversation. But yeah, if it's a conversation about things like performance, just thinking like, why is it that certain conversations would go viral? Like I've seen ones that someone's on a call and it's just like their manager is hammering them and hammering them and hammering them and not taking a second or minute or anything like that to pause and think about the person on the other side of it. Yeah, we do. We all get stressed out. And so I am sure that all of us in our lives, including at work, have times like if you, or God forbid, like the whole however many people heard that conversation back, you'd be super embarrassed. But so as a manager, why I say that is to think about like, okay, what if I'm always being recorded? Is just to think about how in any conversation, it's not an aspect of being recorded, but it's how your messages are heard by your teams. And so some of the habits that you can do, like if you're having something like a performance conversation, I mean, this in almost any conversation, it can be really helpful at the start to ask questions and have it be a conversation, not just like, this is it. Well, so for performance, I mean, ideally it's not a surprise. Like if someone's not performing well, like sometimes it's something like sales, where there's numbers at play or things like that can be a little easier because you can point to those numbers. But sometimes there's, even in those, when it seems crystal clear, there's context behind it. And so in any conversation, it's just pausing. And not to think of the pause of like, am I being recorded? But the pause to think like, how do I want this to come off? And how can I have every conversation from a place of like support and candor. Sometimes those conversations with your team members are not going to be fun. But just in that instance, thinking about how can I have the conversation that shows this person, forget about a social media audience, but shows this person that I, care about them as an individual. I want to hear their perspective. And even if the point of this conversation is, this is what's expected, you're not doing it, then you're making sure that they understand what those expectations are. Because even that, like assumption at the outset, they may not know. And so just thinking about that, how can I get their perspective? Then how can I also give them examples? Like a lot of times if someone's not meeting expectations, people are generally going to want details. So how can I show that? And then also a plan. Your team member, based on their experience or their training or anything, you may say, the expectation's this, X, you're doing Y. So you need to get there. But they may have no idea how to do that. And so that's why having that conversation of what would it look like? What kind of support can I give you? And saying like there's certain things that you'll have to do, but there's other things I can do. And so, no, you're never gonna please everyone at work. Nobody, including your team. But sometimes, even those messages, the way you say it, it's important that people feel like they're treated fairly. And it can be that situation where people don't feel like they're treated fairly or even like a human. That they do. They flip that on and they're like, this is when I'm gonna gotcha. Or they're just preserving it for their own purposes. But if you approach conversations always with this mindset of like, this person is a human, I'm going to think about the things I may not know, questions I have, questions I can ask. And sometimes you will. You'll end up having more than one conversation. But if you do that, that can often mean more than you realize to your team members that are used to like a manager just coming in hot for them, or they look on social media. I can see that repeatedly. So thinking about that perspective, and if someone says something during that conversation, they're like, I didn't think about that. Literally saying that, like, you know what, I hadn't thought about that. And if you need to take time, be like, let me think about that and get back to you. And yeah, because we all have those days. And so if you've had a situation or a conversation, you're like, I came off and I wouldn't look good in that conversation, just to that person, it's never too late to restart that relationship. And sometimes you really got to show them. But generally, that's my perspective. Again, our legal team can talk to that. But from the perspective of thinking about, as you're working with your team, is if you think about that and just think, if I'm always being recorded, like always trying to come off as best you can in that moment. And if you can't have the conversation well in that moment, saying, let's have this, at another time. It's far better than just coming in hot. Okay. Well, everything can feel like an emergency in the moment, so it's okay. Truly.